A carburetor is one of the most important parts of an automobile engine. It is rightly called the heart of the engine. The main function of the carburetor is to supply a proper mixture of air and fuel to the engine. Although the carburetor is complicated looks-wise, its basic operation depends simply on difference of pressure. Let's see how this pressure difference is created. The pressure P1 above the tube is more than the pressure P2. This pressure difference forces the air-fuel mixture down. To have greater efficiency, the tube through which the fuel is drawn, a portion of it is made with a smaller diameter as shown. The air passing through the tube will speed up in the vicinity of the smaller diameter and will also create an area of low pressure. This restriction to the airflow is called venturi. First of all, the fuel enters into the carburetor through the nozzle provided on one end and gets accumulated above the float chamber. The fuel is fed by gravity system. Then the fuel, after being filtered through a fine filter, comes up and goes to the float chamber through a hole provided for this purpose and gets stored there. Let us now see the float system of the carburetor. The gasoline delivered to the chamber is kept in the fuel bowl. The level of the fuel is always kept constant with the help of a float. This system consists of a float-operated needle valve and a seat fixed with the help of a pin as shown. This needle valve rests in its seat and is moved up and down, thus allowing or stopping the flow of fuel. Let us now see how this system operates. As the level of the fuel in the bowl goes down, the float lowers, thereby opening the needle valve and allowing the fuel to enter the bowl. And as soon as fuel reaches its preset level, the float starts rising up, thus forcing the needle valve against the seat and shutting off the fuel supply. This is how a constant level of fuel is always maintained in the bowl. Most of the times during engine operation, the fuel is used from the main fuel system. The fuel leaves the float chamber through a carefully sized hole and enters into a plug called main jet. From here, it is carried to the venturi through a nozzle. The idle system supplies the air-fuel mixture to run the engine when the throttle is completely closed. To allow the engine to operate, an idle port is placed just below the throttle valve through which the fuel enters into the air stream. When the throttle valve is opened slightly for low speed operation, additional fuel is drawn through the slow running port, which is common with the idle port in this case. But in sophisticated carburetors for cars and aircrafts etc., the slow running port is provided separately above the idle port. As the throttle valve is opened further, the airflow increases, thus drawing the fuel directly from the main jet. From here, it is carried to the venturi through the nozzle. When the engine is cooled, additional fuel is required for its starting. For this, the choke piston is pulled and more fuel is drawn through the choke jet, which after passing through the cored passages reaches below the throttle through the choke port. A number of air bleed holes are also provided to keep atmospheric pressure inside the carburetor. Let us now see how to clean a dirty carburetor. First of all, the carburetor has to be removed from the engine. For this, first remove the cover by loosening the screws and then the filter mounted on the top of the carburetor. This is the air clean filter which supplies clean air to the carburetor during engine operation. After that, dismantle the choke and acceleration wires one by one from their respective connections. Then open the fuel supply line, and before that, do not forget to close the fuel cock. Finally, loosen the nuts with a spanner to remove the carburetor from the engine. Replace the cover in its place and put back the shield before getting away. Now take the dirty carburetor in a tray and dismantle its components one by one. Then take a smaller tray and transfer all the parts into that. Keep the bigger tray nearby after cleaning it. Pour some petrol over these parts and with the help of a paintbrush clean all the components one by one. All the jets and the holes in the carburetor body must be cleaned thoroughly. Keep the cleaned parts in the bigger tray. The fuel filter must also be cleaned thoroughly. After that, the jets and the holes in the body must be cleaned with compressed air. The fuel filter must also be cleaned thoroughly. Finally, the various components are assembled with the main body to make it ready for fitting back on the scooter. Before fitting the carburetor back, let us see how the fuel is sucked into the engine. In two-stroke engines, the fuel is sucked either through the crank or through the piston as shown. While in four-stroke engines, the fuel is sucked through the inlet valves. The cleaned carburetor is put back in its place and tightened with the help of nuts. Fuel supply is restored and the choke and accelerator wires are reconnected. Do not forget to clean the air clean filter before mounting it back on the carburetor. Finally, the tuning of the engine is done. First of all, the slow running is adjusted from the screw provided on the top of the carburetor by rotating it in the required direction, and then the mixture adjustment is made from the screw provided on the left side. After that, the slow running is again adjusted from the top screw. In the end, the engine running is checked at different accelerations. By now, you must have realized that how important a carburetor is in an automobile engine.